Hi, and welcome back to End Times Prophecy News Update. Carrie Geren Scoggins reporting. This week we're discussing the Equality Act that on the surface appears to support the rights of gays, lesbians, and transgenders. Yet, when you read the bill, you find that it's focused at preventing Christians from practicing their rights. You will note in the Equality Act, there was a specific clause to have it trump the Religious Freedom Act of the early 1990s. The authors of the Equality Act made sure to write into the bill that it would negate the Religious Freedom Act of the early 1990s, 1994, and this due to the Christian opposition. This bill was more focused at the opposition than it ever was about actual rights of gays, lesbians, and transgenders. This bill was meant to prevent anyone from opposing their viewpoint, which would later be used for religious censorship purposes. They didn't want freedom straight across the board for everyone. They just wanted freedom for their own side. It's actually written into the bill that it would negate the Religious Freedom Act. However, the authors of the Equality Act seem to forget the more recent federal Supreme Court ruling supporting Christian civil rights, backing up the First Amendment, that of the Biblical Core Values ruling, our legal right to adhere to biblical core values, where the federal Supreme Court cited specifically our legal right to preach and teach Romans chapter 1 in our churches, schools, and religious facilities. Then there's the legal right to proselytize federal Supreme Court ruling, upholding our legal right to proselytize a full uncensored Bible, citing Romans chapter 1 specifically, even on pamphlets and even on government land. Our legal right to continue to proselytize Romans chapter 1, publicly and privately, even on government land and even in pamphlets. There was also the 1964 Civil Rights Act, having given religion and religious tenants protected class status. Those that still preach and teach Romans chapter 1 and biblical references to homosexuality have their civil rights protected by the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Religion was on the 1964 Civil Rights list of protected classes long before homosexuality was. And, of course, our legal right to debate the issues, upheld in the Phelps ruling in the federal Supreme Court, when the federal Supreme Court overturned the hate speech law, upholding our legal right to debate Islam, homosexuality, abortion, and any issue from a biblical viewpoint, and our legal right to debate other religions. All of these federal laws trump all other laws. They're federal Supreme Court rulings. This Equality Act directly violates these previous federal Supreme Court rulings that have been recently upheld. meaning that the Equality Act will land itself in the courts having its constitutionality put in check, and it will be shot down because it violates Christian civil rights and constitutional law. Book banning of pamphlets and religious literature that teach one can get deliverance from homosexuality. This bill is in direct violation with recent federal Supreme Court rulings such as the Biblical Core Values ruling. Our legal right to adhere to biblical core values, where the federal Supreme Court cited specifically scriptures on homosexuality, our legal right to preach and teach, Romans chapter 1, and scriptures that do not condone homosexuality, or that of Deuteronomy 22:5, that does not condone cross-dressing, as well as our legal right to proselytize, federal Supreme Court ruling, our legal right to proselytize a full uncensored Bible, and as it was said in the federal Supreme Court, even on government land. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, giving religion protected class status. Religion is a protected class. It's illegal for the state to target a religion, such as this bill. It obviously targets Christianity because Islam and the pagan religions do not believe one can get deliverance from homosexuality. And they do believe in putting them to death. Christianity stands alone in teaching that homosexuality is a sin and one can get deliverance from this type of behavior. Romans chapter 1 lays out in chronological order why one is given over to a reprobate mind according to the Christian religious faith. This is a well-known Christian religious biblical tenet, as well as the teaching of getting deliverance or being set free, or teachings of deliverance, seeking out religious counseling, which does not include approval of the American Medical Association. And the American Medical Association has again restated in the federal Supreme Court several times in the last 10 years that there's never been found a gay gene to date, that there was never found a clump of genes creating a homosexual, nor were there ever found epigenetic markers cutting on a gay gene. And with all the, quote, new studies, still, that there was more evidence shown that they were not born gay than that they were. And still no proof that they were born gay, as stated in the federal Supreme Court by the American Medical Association. The American Medical Association did still identify transgender as gender identity disorder. Counselors that believed homosexuality, since they were not born gay, there was no gay gene, that they could counsel them in certain areas that they felt had influence on why they turned out to be homosexual, such as possible molestation and what many thought to be a father wound in homosexuals or a mother wound in lesbianism, where they didn't get the proper nurturing from their parent of the same gender, that somehow psychologically they're reaching out for that love that they did not get from their mother or father. Pastoral counseling, it teaches going back and repenting for one's sin in order to get deliverance or be set free. And that Romans chapter 1 is laid out in chronological order, telling why one is given over to a reprobate mind, in order for the individual struggling with this issue to go back and repent for those areas where they have sinned, so they can be set free. Romans 1:21, they knew who God was and refused to serve him as God. Romans 1:25, They go over and worship the creation rather than the Creator. Romans 1:28. Then they're given over to a reprobate mind. Where man sleeps with man as should be with a woman, and a woman sleeps with a woman as should be with a man. The process of going back and repenting for these acts, of taking steps away from God, in order to get deliverance or be set free, is that one would hear from a deliverance minister in pastoral counseling. That they knew who God was and left him. They had rejected the Bible and Christianity. They then go over and worship the creation rather than the Creator. They leave Christianity for another religion. The New Age movement, Hinduism, Buddhism. They leave the Bible and go over into other belief systems. And then God gave them over to a reprobate mind. There were many that left Christianity for the New Age movement in the early 1990s. And later we saw a huge number of people having been given over to a reprobate mind. The end outcome of the rejection of the Bible. This is the teaching on deliverance and being set free. Classic teachings in Scripture that we find. Biblical tenants protected by the Biblical Core Values ruling. Our legal right to proselytize in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, giving religion protected class status. And when the hate speech law was overturned in the federal Supreme Court, it was upheld that we had the legal right to debate the issue. The legal right to debate Islam, homosexuality, abortion, and any issue from a biblical viewpoint. The old political adage that you are not a libertarian until you've supported the legal rights of those that you despise. And this saying that I may not agree with what you're saying, but I would give my life for your legal right to say it. We're not taught to the younger generation. They had a revisionist history version of a civics class in the United States, where what our founding fathers taught of our legal right to debate the issue, the right of the individual to choose how they will live, what they will read, what they will believe, without the state dictating it to them, was left out. Karl Marx supported the working for the greater good, the common good, and having a board or bureau deciding what will be allowed in their country and their community. Karl Marx was not our founder. We don't go to the government to ask them what they will allow us to read. What will the government allow us to own, buy, or sell? Thought crime legislation being passed to censor our legal right to debate the issue, our legal right to oppose the state's viewpoint, which would usher in state-approved Bibles, state-approved sermons. The state does not hand down those rights to the people. We hand up the rights to the states. The state does not have the legal right to tell us what we can and cannot read, what ideals we can and cannot entertain or sell in literature. Concerning Marxist censorship, we do not work for the common good. We don't wait for the government to tell us what we can and cannot read. Concerning why the United States does not have censorship, why our First Amendment ensures our legal right of freedom of religion, the legal right to protest, freedom of speech, and freedom of the press. Our founders held dearly the right of the individual to choose for themselves how they will live, what they will believe. Not asking the state what they're going to allow us to read, what they're going to allow the church to preach or teach. Not having state-censored Bibles, state-approved Bibles, state-approved sermons. The rights are not handed down to the people from the state. We hand the rights up to the state as a people, a government by the people. The separation of church and state in its original intent was to keep the state out of the church, to prevent religious censorship, book bans, banning of the Bible, banning of religious tenets that someone in the state has now deemed dangerous. The legal right to oppose the state's viewpoint. The legal right to oppose the Democratic Party platform and their viewpoint. Our freedom of speech and freedom of religion, freedom of the press. Values we've held so dear. Our constitutional civil rights that our founders died for, threatened by the Democratic Party when the hate speech law was overturned in the federal Supreme Court because it violated the First Amendment. They upheld our legal right to debate the issue. The legal right to debate Islam, homosexuality, abortion, and any issue from a biblical viewpoint. Our legal right to debate homosexuality has already been upheld in the federal Supreme Court on a federal level and federal Trump state. The California state legislation is in direct violation with this federal Supreme Court ruling, the Biblical Core Values ruling, our legal right to proselytize, and the 1964 Civil Rights Act giving religion protected class status. And of course, our First Amendment, which these new rulings do recognize. When Chuck Schumer, Harry Reid, Hillary Clinton, and Nancy Pelosi, and the top Democrats pushed amending the First Amendment, it was shot down as the American public did not agree. We want to keep our First Amendment, our civil rights, our human rights, of the legal right to oppose the state's view. Our legal right to choose how we will live, what we will read, what we can buy on the shelves, and what we can sell. Making ideals illegal and book bans is that of Nazi Germany. When the old gay Nazi brown shirts went house to house search and seizure to enforce the Nazi good speak law, banning literature and books that opposed the gay identity movement of Nazi Germany. They made such mass arrests that they had to build concentration camps to house all those that refuse to submit to a religious censorship. We see history repeating itself. The LGBT movement of America is becoming more and more that of the gay identity movement of Nazi Germany, complete with attempting to ban books that oppose their viewpoint. Even after the American Medical Association has stated again, there was no gay gene. There were found no clump of genes creating a homosexual, nor were there found any epigenetic markers cutting on a gay gene in the DOMA hearings and other federal Supreme Court hearings as of late. And that all the new studies did more to prove that they were not born gay than that they were. And that there's been found no gay gene to date nor any proof they were born gay. Before we allow totalitarianism and that which opposed what our founding fathers so supported, bringing in state-approved Bibles, state-approved sermons, allowing the state to decide what we can and cannot preach and teach, violating that original intent in the separation of church and state to keep the state out of the church. Stop them from telling us what we can and cannot preach and teach and what ideals we can entertain, what viewpoint we're allowed to believe. Thought crime legislation. It's time for the American Christian to stand up and get politically active. Bring back the old adage, you're not a libertarian until you support the legal rights of those that you despise. And I may not believe what you're saying, but I would support with my life your legal right to say it. Political statements that were made that supported our First Amendment rights. As the Democrats began to trample more and more upon that First Amendment. Chuck Schumer, in his attempt to amend the First Amendment, was shot down because the American public said, no, we will not accept taking away our legal rights of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and allow the state to then decide what we're going to be allowed to believe and teach. State-approved Bibles. Our freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of the press, our legal right to proselytize, a full uncensored Bible, and to preach and teach a full uncensored Bible in our churches, being threatened yet again by the Democratic Party. Our legal right to oppose the state and our legal right to oppose the Democratic Party's viewpoint and their party platform. Again, threatened. We saw a nice Parker of Houston, Texas, attempting to subpoena church sermons from 5 African-American churches, sermons on homosexuality. Again, directly violating the biblical core values ruling. More and more attempts by the Democratic Party to criminalize the King James Bible and enforce a censored version. The Democratic Party has proven time and again their goal and intent is to incarcerate those that oppose their viewpoint. It may begin with issues on homosexuality, but once Pandora's box of censorship is opened, it will not end. The Democratic Party has proven time and again their goal and aim is Bible censorship and state censorship on religious viewpoints and any viewpoint that opposes that of the Democratic Party platform. This is another stab at bringing in more and more hindrance to a full uncensored Bible and the Christian church's full Christian civil rights that we see of the First Amendment. Again, upheld in the biblical core values ruling and the legal right to proselytize and our legal right to debate the issues as upheld when the hate speech law was overturned in the federal Supreme Court. Recent rulings just backing up the First Amendment. More and more attempts to encroach upon the Christian civil rights. Again, a generation that was not taught that it's freedom straight across the board, not just for their viewpoint. The legal right to debate the issues, the legal right to oppose the state's view. Freedom of speech can be an offensive thing. when someone doesn't like what another has stated. It's about tolerance and accepting someone else's viewpoint as that of their own, though we disagree. The legal right to agree to disagree, but freedom straight across the board for everyone involved, not just for that of the Democratic Party. The LGBT movement is looking more and more akin to that of the Nazi gay identity movement, and it is history repeating itself. The end result of the gay identities movement going in, gladly arresting those that opposed their viewpoint, that kept religious literature that spoke against homosexuality, and enforcing that Nazi good speak law and the Bible burnings. Those that did not submit their Bible to be burned was sent off to a concentration camp. Such mass arrest that they built concentration camps to house all of them. We see this coming in America. If there's ever a Bible ban or a ban on the Torah, that again, it would be house-to-house search and seizure. And if the Americans are found holding a Bible as contraband, arrested, and such mass arrest that they're going to put them in FEMA camps. The American version of the Nazi concentration camps. We're looking at a real threat coming in the future. It's time to get politically active. History is repeating itself. The Democratic Party seems to be unable to even conceive the idea that if once censorship is brought in, that they too can be censored. That when the political winds change in a different direction, and those that oppose their viewpoint take office, that they can then censor them. What happened in Nazi Germany when Adolf Hitler suddenly converts into Islam? His imam, Haj Amin al-Husseini, demanded that then the homosexuals were also to be put into the concentration camps. The very gay Nazi brown shirts regiment that enforced the Nazi good speak law, leading to the arrests of the Christians and Jews that refused to submit to a religious censorship law, having them arrested and carted off to concentration camps during the Bible burnings, were they themselves sent to the concentration camps. So when you see someone else's civil rights being violated, though it may not be your own viewpoint, it's time to stand up and speak out. The legal right to oppose the state's viewpoint, the legal right of debate, freedom straight across the board for all viewpoints, and practicing tolerance for those that oppose your own. Ideals that many in the Democratic Party wish would just go away. That our founders held so dear. Our First Amendment, human rights, the freedom of thought crime legislations that would impose state-approved Bibles, state-approved sermons, and tell you what you can and cannot buy or read, what ideals you can believe and teach, what you can pass on to your children, what your pastor can say in church. The legal right of the individual to choose for themselves how they will live and what they will believe. That of the Jeffersonian Republic, supporting Thomas Jefferson's viewpoint of the legal right of the individual as opposed to working for the collective good. That of Karl Marx. Karl Marx, again, was not our founding father. We do not work for a common good where a board or bureau tells us what we can and cannot do, what books we can and cannot buy or sell, what we can and cannot believe. Thomas Jefferson, our founder, supported the legal right of the individual, where we choose for ourselves how we will live without state intervention, without the state deciding for us. The freedom for me to choose what religious tenets I will follow, without the state going through and blacking out parts of the Bible, censoring it, and handing me a state-approved Bible, where someone else makes those personal choices that we are to make for ourselves, what we will believe, how we will live. The American way is under threat. Our very First Amendment that our founders held so dear, the legal right to protest, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and our beloved legal right to adhere to biblical core values, which was upheld in the federal Supreme Court. The Democratic Party has continued endlessly trying to chip away at those rights. And though they've continued to be shot down, such as Chuck Schumer's attempt to amend the First Amendment, or Anais Parker's attempt to subpoena church sermons on homosexuality in Houston, Texas, where we've seen the state trying to come in and ban any view that opposes that of the Democratic Party or that of the LGBT movement. It's time for the Christians to get up and get politically active, as I've said so many times. Christians, start writing the media, contacting your legislators, getting out and planning protests, contacting the schools, contacting your leaders, contacting the media, reminding them of federal law, that biblical core values ruling, our legal right to proselytize, a full uncensored Bible, federal Supreme Court ruling, the 1964 Civil Rights Act giving religion protected class status, making it illegal to target a religious group with such thought crime legislation as this, and reminding them that the hate speech law was overturned, upholding our legal right to debate the issues. And yet again, we see another attempt at the same old tired censorship. This is Carrie Geren Scoggins of End Times Prophecy News Update. Again, reminding the Christian community to get out and get politically active and support Christian civil rights. Thank you for listening.